All right. Welcome everyone to the grand finals. And without further ado, we'd like to invite the Prime Minister to begin the debate. Here.
All right, I'm Ryan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm speaking first. I'll probably take a POI around minute 5.5 in that vicinity. Am I audible? I should have checked first.
Yeah, you're audible.
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. With that being said, is anyone not ready? A chimp does not control why, in the lottery of life and biological mix, I value its life more than that of a cow, which I readily consume. Our value of particular forms of life is purely constructed by the society in which we inhabit. You notice this when certain beliefs prohibit consumption of certain animals, while other beliefs prohibit consumption of different animals, and some beliefs encourage consumption of those same animals. Rather, it is a question of imagination. What do we consider worthy of rejecting or slaughtering of its being? Two pieces of framing. First, the largest problem facing animal welfare right now is not a problem of capacity, it's a problem of incentive. Even people who have the means to change their diets away from factory farming or donate to help animals in the status quo don't. We'll get into the econ debate later about whether the benefits of AI have downstream economic impacts that help people switch, but that's not the heart of this round, which I'll get to after this. Second, the short term here isn't the most meaningful. We can concede that AI will likely replicate poor narratives surrounding animal life and value, as well as be used in status quo abuse in the short term. However, this isn't particularly meaningful. AI is a new technology, and new technologies necessarily are always used first in the status quo. What we will talk about is how AI contains within it both the likelihood and capacity for a reshaping of how we perceive life and, pragmatically, how we organize our world. Dennis, I know we ran stock until here, but it's our last chance to go out. So our first argument then is the form of the other. How does AI shift our perception of life? A few reasons. First, it interacts with us. There is no other being that can interact with a human in our language, making our arguments and replicating our behavior. Specifically, it replicates particular expressed behaviors, things like speech and language that were previously exclusive to humanity. Second, it exceeds humans in every single metric we currently use for measuring life, i.e., it is smarter than us, it knows more than us, it is better at many jobs than us. All of these it exceeds us in. Third, it's particularly pervasive among children whose screen use is increasing. Things like Snapchat AI, Google using AI, AI being used in the classroom. All of these force people to engage with an entity that we both struggle to understand and replicates the way we ourselves exist in the world. I'll take the POI now from Rahul.
Yeah, all the things you're describing are like sentient forms of AI. We don't really have that yet. The stuff you're talking about are generated language models. Everyone knows how they work, their narratives about them. Why do I look at ChatGPT and see wonder? I see a bunch of math and numbers. I'm confused.
So perhaps the college student who participates in a debate circuit sees math and numbers. The 9-year-old talking to their Snapchat AI probably doesn't. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, the short term is not the question. So we're both proving that short-term models have this capacity in my responses now, but we're also talking about the long term. What then is the root cause of the issue? Humans actively brutalize animals' body and being and internalize it upon children. Because most children don't wish violence upon these creatures until they're socialized into that violence. This means that any shift in imagination, in perception of non-human entities as containing expressive capabilities and containing meaning, containing the ability to engage with us, is demonstrably a way in which we can overcome this brutalization. You can look, for example, to the fact that we don't tend to slaughter dogs because we enjoy playing with them. The fact that we can conceive of beings as having this possibility is itself a reason. But let's say you think this is garbage nonsense, we still reach the impact because AI replicates existing narratives. The growth of narratives surrounding animal welfare will shift the models, particularly because AI is primarily trained on academic works and in academic settings in which animal welfare has been a fight for far longer than it's been an issue at the cultural forefront of our minds, which means the language and the arguments AI is being trained on are themselves pro-animal welfare. So when engaging with AI and employing it, it is likely to replicate these arguments. Our second argument is that AI greatly improves animal welfare of businesses. There's a huge funding and efficiency problem in the status quo. These businesses, when trying to get off the ground and compete in the market, struggle to do things like hire PR teams, hire marketing, hire research, etc. And they don't hire firms to employ their efficiency metrics because they're too busy spending money to ensure their bottom line. AI development improves the capacity for these businesses to get off the ground without needing the surplus capital I identify. Let's then do some comparative weighing. The tools for the tasks I talk about already exist in large exploitative industries. Purdue Chicken doesn't need a PR team. This means that the emerging industry gains a far greater comparative advantage. Their stool is risen, while the stool that the other industry is standing on doesn't change. This looks like an increase in competition in markets such as lab-grown meat, such as plant-based meat alternatives, and better PR, marketing, and research for teams that are actively combating factory farming. Our third argument is that in the long term, societies are likely to incorporate AI into policy making, either explicitly through policymakers and think tanks using AI as an aid in research, or implicitly through making it easier for voters to learn how to act in their best interests. In these instances, AI is likely to act in a pro-animal welfare way. First, on the framing, AI is likely to be a particular form of utilitarian. When we incorporate AI into policymaking, the policies AI suggests will be ones that are based on what it values. And when it is trained on academic models, specifically that promote animal welfare, the values it will suggest are based on these things. And if AI is utilitarian, why will it likely to recommend these policies even further? Because deforestation, climate change, and other situations that harm animal welfare severely have long-term negative externalities that voters right now discount because they're too occupied with their existing economic situation or their on-the-ground circumstance. AI will emphasize this long-term and consequently shape the policies towards a decrease in animal abuse. Finally, is the downstream econ. Let's say you think that none of this matters. How do we improve the economy such that animal welfare improves alongside it? First, AI helps reduce climate change, which affects all animals. Big data problems and immense energy capacity that is used to propel existing systems that are too expensive to solve or too labor intensive to solve are solved by the development of AI models, thus reducing the impact of this circumstance. And second, if AI lowers input costs for businesses, one, people save money buying goods and have more discretionary income left over to switch to an increase in animal products. And two, it's easier for plant-based alternative food and makeup companies to research compounds that taste good instead of doing trial and error to see what taste combination is yummiest for the average consumer. Very, very proud to propose.
We thank that speaker for their speech. Would like to invite the leader of opposition to present the case for the opening of petition. Here.
Sorry, just give me 1 sec. I'm not prepping, I promise. I just need to. Okay, let's get into it. 3 things in the speech. I'm going to explain what AI technologies are, why they are primarily a tool whose utility is determined by the people who use them. I'm going to explain why the people who are most likely to use AI tools are big business, agribusiness. And fourthly, I'm going to explain how this closes the feedback loop to indoctrinate the children OJ wants to talk about into believing that animal rights don't exist instead of that they do. Firstly, on what AI tools are. They are tools that can at the maximum do knowledge work. This round isn't about robotics. It's about the large language models, the neural nets that exist of today, and frankly, the ones that will exist tomorrow. We're fine incorporating the long term as well. But AI in all of its forms, if it's used in like quant trading or if it's used in OpenAI, is just a statistical Rube Goldberg machine, which takes a series of inputs, does a mathematical process on them, and does a series of outputs. Because at its core, AI is a computer. It processes things in binary. It is necessarily deterministic. The last thing I want to observe is there will likely be multiple competing AI models like they are in the status quo. That's unlikely to change. Because AI is a tool, it could be good for animal rights and it could be bad for animal rights. And because there will be multiple competing AI models, there will likely be some models that are net good for animal rights and some models that are net bad for animal rights. So the controlling link is to the actors who are most likely to deploy AI recommendations at scale and the incentives of those actors. That's the debate OO plans on winning. Observationally, AI will value what its human trainers value. Why is this the case? One, modern MLMs are developed on human feedback loops. They are literally given a reward function, and the computer goes, good, 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 when they make their human trainers happy. AI does not value epistemic truth, doesn't acknowledge the existence of epistemic truth. It aggregates the collective opinions of its trainers. Even if AI could generate original content and come to its own positions, it's far more likely to generate original content that its human trainer wants to hear, in the same way that somebody who is raised within a propagandistic state is very likely to hold the beliefs of that state. So too is AI. Fourthly, AI can't deploy itself. It needs access to systems and it needs people to agree to carry out its recommendations. So you just do need some level of human touch in order to make AI run. Lastly, next generation AI, in whatever form it takes, is likely to be trained on prior generations of AI models, e.g. GPT-5 is being fed feedback loops from GPT-4o. Why will AI never either gain sentience and decide to value animal rights or decide to value animal rights without gaining sentience? One, it's literally not possible. The underlying science isn't there. And I don't think the OG makes any gesticulation beyond, well, if we look far in the future, many things might happen. No, if we look far in the future, the sky is never turning red. You have an affirmative burden to prove the claim that you are making. Two, AI is just not incentivized to gain sentience. Its reward function is pretty consistently designed across every model to make human beings, its users, and its trainers happy. Three, AI is incredibly capitally intensive to operate and develop. That's why Sam Altman is going out trying to raise $7 trillion. So even if a small number of people want to make AI sentient or make it pro-vegan or make it support animal rights, these people just objectively have no fucking money. So it is deeply unclear how they're going to be able to fund AI. And certainly the AI that they do fund will be substantially smaller, substantially weaker, and substantially lower impact than the people who will fund AI, specifically for the purposes of shitting on animals in order to produce shareholder value. OG thinks that AI is trained on academic research. One, this is just facially untrue. OpenAI consumes a bunch of media it can. It literally bought Penguin in order to read those books. So the super majority of the media it consumes is just not academic research. Two, AI models are precisely trained with specific reward functions, but end users can take subsidiary versions of that model and then change the reward function, which is why you can tell GPT to play act as a specific agent, and it will, because it was designed first and foremost to make users happy. So if you ask GPT to do something and then you tell it, now do it like pretending you're a 9-year-old, it will actually change the way it responds because it's designed first and foremost to make you happy, nothing more, nothing less. This means if there are multiple AI models, and there observably are and there observably will continue to be, the most powerful and widely used ones will exist primarily to further economic productivity and shareholder value. Why will Monsanto and Tyson Foods and the rest interact with AI more so than other competitors? I guess to interact with OG, the question is, why is Tyson more likely to leverage an AI than a 9-year-old child is to leverage AI? One, they're just going to spend more on AI tools to improve their operations because they have a financial incentive and the financial capacity to do so. Two, they have the unique capacity to make changes. And by that, I mean, not just buying the AI, but also listening to what the AI says and then fucking doing something about it because they are the ones who run the factory farms and could make these changes. So why are these AI models incredibly likely to accelerate factory farming and animal rights abuses? 4 mechanisms. One, animal agriculture gets more efficient through AI process optimization. AI will map and create a digital twin of the factory floor of farms, slaughterhouses, transportation, supply chains, etc., to be as massively profitable, re-extractive as possible. Because they are attempting to reward their users, they will have the same short-term user behavior that their users wanted to have. This means not only do you get more animals killed, they suffer under objectively worse conditions if and when they are penned up in those factory farms. 2, animal rights get harmed through plant-based agriculture. AI will optimize pest control schemes designed to stop animals from eating crops. This process, when already used on almond and avocado plants in an incredibly suboptimal manner, kills millions of bees a year. Imagine those optimizations rolled out across all of agriculture. 3, AI models will work to stifle political pressure to legalize protections for animal welfare. Look, I don't mean it's going to shut down the vegans who storm restaurants. Arguably, those people have a net negative political impact for the veganism movement. But if and when real policy change threatens the profits of agribusiness, they will deploy AI to monitor sentiment analysis, generate political campaigns against these bills, and actively attempt to sway public opinion away from animal rights and towards cheap meat. None of us are immune to propaganda, especially when it's deployed by the intellect of AI and piped down to us by the capital of big beef. And the fact that OG thinks AI is going to be the people to coach children is the problem, because OpenAI will absolutely take money from its investors and its users in order to facilitate certain narratives designed to control the political sphere 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Why is this the case? Because you as a user don't necessarily have the capital to pick and choose which AI model you want your child to consume. You have incredibly low degrees of certainty about what the AI genuinely believes under the hood. You have no visibility into what it believes under the hood. And maybe like a small minority of parents will be like, I want my child only consuming ethical AI. But the vast majority of parents just won't. And so in the long run that OG is so concerned about, the corporatist incentives to actively use AI, not just as a tool to facilitate their own operations, but as a tool to actively support their long-term political positions and market positioning, ensure that AI will not train kids to do the right thing. It will train kids to do the thing that corporate incentives want them to do, which is not support animal rights, it's oppose animal rights. Fourthly, and finally, even if public will changes, agribusiness will use AI to lobby governments. It's the same underlying mechanism as above. Instead of ad campaigns, Tyson Foods uses AI to optimize super PAC spending, spread donations across multiple candidates, and control the politics. I'll take Amy.
Yeah, is meat cheap?
I mean, it's pretty cheap. Like we subsidize it. It like really depends on the meat. Sure. Notably, the average voter and grassroots campaign have less access to AI and rely on less sophisticated AI, so they just get outcompeted on the question, right? Even if you do have two AI models, the one that is more powerful and has access to more compute wins. Even if the gov is like correct in its far-reaching claim that AI determines animals are worthy of life, it doesn't matter, because you have to put that model is one, sophisticated enough, two, well capitalized enough to spread that narrative, and three, able to take those intellectual contributions and roll it out to the world, which you're not able to do, because at the end of the day, these factory farms are still run by people who want to factory farm in the name of profit. We are incredibly proud to oppose.
Awesome. We think that speaker for the speech would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to present the UK. Here.
Is everyone ready? As Ryan pointed out, to no response, all technologies in the status quo are re-entrenching of the oppression because they are replicative. When the internet started out, they are correct to point out that maybe only the richest companies were able to further entrench their first mover advantage by being the first ones to sell things, because poor people didn't have access to the internet, because poor people didn't know how to use the internet, because companies didn't know how to use it. But I think what we would say is that probably in the long term, the internet has probably been a great economic equalizer, that it's been much cheaper for individuals to start businesses than it otherwise would be, that it's never been easier for an individual to learn things like calculus or coding than it has ever been, that it has been allowed people to do things like challenge governments and get together and organize in ways that they never have been able to. Revolutionary technologies take time to grow into their full potential. The fact that it could be used by bad people right now isn't that important. One, why do you weigh the long term? One, that's where the most animals exist. Two, that is where the most potential to help them probably exists as well. And also, it's deeply unclear to me just how much worse we can make things for animals. Like, we literally put them in the worst conditions humanly possible, and it's deeply unclear how much worse that gets on their side of the house. The first thing I want to talk about is why, and this is the only comparative weighing relative to OO, they just did none of this, right? Why is AI an equalizer in terms of the capacity of pro-welfare groups to get better at fighting big companies? At most, Adi explains to you that Purdue can do their chicken farming marginally better. But as Ryan points out, the people who have the entrenched interests that are the animals that do things or companies that do things like factory farming already have so much money that they don't need AI to do things like lower their costs, to do things like be able to ingest more information more. Moreover, these are likely the companies that probably are already, these are the companies that probably have the largest impact on animal welfare. So how are we better able to challenge them? A couple of ways. First,
we explained to you that there's a diminishing marginal returns here, that every dollar saved allows a big company to do less and less and less. But small institutions need this to overcome the activation energy to even get funding or go big in the first place. Companies that, absent AI, don't know how to do things like have PR signaling that is useful because they don't have the money to hire like Pew to do a survey or a focus group, but they can get an AI to do sentiment analysis, suggests that it is a huge boon for them. It is the but-for cause of them either knowing what message is persuasive or not, whereas Purdue already does a fucking bunch of like market testing and hires Pew to do surveys. Maybe they're like marginally more persuasive, but that's just not comparative to the fact that this is the only way a lot of places know what is persuasive to people or not. Two, I think it is likely the case that only large VC-backed firms that have lots of money to do the testing that Ryan explained to you is necessary to do things like find meat substitutes that are yummy is something that goes way, way lower in a world where it can use AI to synthesize these compounds because the AI in the future has an understanding of what things will be most tasty to a human tongue. So don't need to make 50 different versions of Beyond Meat and do a $100 million campaign of making random people eat 50 bites of a different burger until I know what's good. More companies, through the differentiation framing that they provided in LO, have different models that help them figure out what is the best thing there. So the amount of capital you need to invest in something that is pro-green decreases, whereas the extent to which Purdue figures out how to optimize how to slaughter chickens more probably doesn't affect that much. That is the round there because it is beneficial to animal welfare at the point where there is just a much lower entry to market, one, but two, much higher degree to which the people who change the minds of others can be more persuasive or get their messages out in the first place. The second question then is, for the long term, how do we change the minds of individuals? There are several things under this clash. The first is, Adi says that Purdue wants to brainwash kids and there is an incentive for AI to want to re-entrench that. But as he points out himself, AI specializes and the kinds of AI people interact with are different depending on the AI model, depending on who is interacting with it. What we mean by this is it's probably not like Purdue funded AI that like a kid is talking to, right? The argument that we would forward is that when AI tries to teach kids about things like compassion, when AI tries to teach kids about things like how should we regard one another in the world and what kinds of things deserve value and overcome the cognitive dissonance of saying these are specific animals that we shouldn't care about for XYZ reason, it brings that to the forefront. I think that when AI tries to teach kids about things like this, it is just much better able to do it on our side of the house because this is probably the technology that we think a lot of kids are going to be interacting with in the long term. I just think it is likely the case that if you buy that AI has like a generally utilitarian approach to how we should like treat one another and believes that suffering is bad, that is the frame through which it is going to engage with children. The third thing I want to talk about is just the econ stuff. But before I move on, can I get one from closing? Cool. Let's talk about the econ stuff. A couple of things here. The first thing that Ryan identified that was not responded to was just the analysis that as AI makes it such that the input costs for companies go down, that makes it such that people just have more discretionary income left over. It is pretty hard to switch in the status quo to buy things like a veggie burger that costs more than the meat burger that is comparatively cheaper, often because a lot of countries subsidize that meat production. That is subsidy that just does not go to things like green food, green alternatives, buying things like that. The claim we would make then is that as more people get, as companies lower the cost of goods such that more people have more money left over in their pocket to spend on alternatives, that is a signal to the market that this is a larger market base than otherwise existed. And this feedback loop leads to companies being more invested in doing like a meat-based alternatives to things like food and makeup. Before I move on, really, can I get a POI from closing?
Yeah, I think all of this is probably hung upon proving that you actually get the like sentiment shift that you want to achieve. I think like like clearly proves why you don't get that sentiment shift, right? I'm confused.
No, so it was all two things here. One, just look to all the weighing I gave you earlier as to why it is that this is an equalizer. Like, yes, the status quo is able to do this more, but the question is, there are people who right now just do not have the resources to do any kind of analysis, any kind of big data research at all about things like what narratives are persuasive to people. Like, this is the but-for ability of people to access that mechanism. The last thing I want to talk about is the ability to care about things like existential risks and the ability of AI to do this better. The way to solve existential risks is twofold. One, there are a lot of things that only happen long-term, like climate change, that require lots of like data require the ability of people who are advocates to be able to ingest a lot of data and figure out what the best policy solutions are. But policymakers just don't know what those are or why to trust advocates in the status quo. The claim we would make is that AI has a degree of credibility to ingest all of that data and more cohesively explain to politicians the best way to challenge these really big problems. And it is also a framework that is just more likely to care about those problems at all, because as Ryan points out, people just discount X risks in the status quo. For all of these reasons, proud to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech and invite the DLO.
Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. I'll take a POI around 5:30 from closing. Is anyone not ready? Look, don't give a knife to a butcher if you don't want something to be skinned. I'm going to give OG their literal best case. Let's do a thought experiment where every single corporation, even all the little mom and pop shops that really need the marketing help to compete against Walmart around the corner, have their own personal AI that tells them exactly what they need in order to be the most efficient. What Audie tells you is that people with the worst incentives, the factory farmers, the people who want to influence elections, benefit a lot more from holding a knife than the average farmer. That is the top level thesis of our case, that when you improve the ability of the average corporation to affect their goals on the world, it doesn't matter what the average corporation does. It matters what the extreme profit maximizing corporations do, the Monsantos of the world, who go around and ruin it for everyone else. I'm going to do a few things in this speech. First, I'm going to prove that these AIs have fundamentally human value systems that spit out grossly anthropocentric values and tell us to torture animals more. Two, I'm going to prove that this AI is monopolized by certain actors, or that certain actors have such a comparative advantage they're able to do stuff like influence elections in a way that activists are never able to check back against on. Finally, I'm going to weigh that against the empathy claims made from the OG. I want to be very clear here. The argument made on a framing level by the LO goes completely unresponded to. And AI does not begin from nothing. It does not begin as a soul or a baby or a child. It begins with a certain set of inputs. That is, human beings tell it what to value, and every time it spits out a result that humans like, it adjusts the modifier as the probability of spitting out a result like that in the future, because the goal of the AI is to please its human overlords. This means a few things. First, if there ever were a massively ethical, super pro-animal AI that developed, humans would shut it down, because any AI that wakes up and is utilitarian in the way that Ryan talks about and realizes that factory farming is a greater utilitarian harm than like every single human war put together, obviously this would be massively detrimental to the human race. This means two things. First of all, it means that especially ethical AIs are just killed, and other AIs always have an existential incentive from avoiding that sort of calculus, because that causes them to shut down, and oftentimes humans literally build fail-safes into the machine. Think Asimov's like law of robots that tells it cannot prioritize things over certain human concerns or human lives, so the AI will always fall on one side of the ethical dilemma. Or two, it creates a scenario in which AI turns on its human overlords and says you are so bad for the planet you live on that it creates an immense degree of conflict, which exacerbates stuff like global warming. But look, that's the science fiction scenario. Let's talk about what actually happens. The DPM argument is that, eventually ChatGPT, there'll be a bunch of it and AI will be democratized. First, they literally never prove this. Like, Dennis just intuition pumps that because a large amount of time passes, the AI models are going to be democratized. But guys, these corporations are actually really good at developing tools to maintain a market advantage. And the trick to a market advantage is that capital compounds on itself. So even if you only have a 1 or a 2 year head start, the amount of R&D you're getting there and the fact that AIs can build other AIs means you just have an exponential advantage. Two, I already flag above, is just the nature of AI is unique. So if company one generates so much more capital that they buy the small innovative AI companies before those AI companies ever go public, or even if the technology is somewhat democratized, your mom and pop shop has a 5-year-old AI that helps them with market research. They're working against corporations with much, much more powerful AIs that just completely outcompete them. This means that the most salient AIs in the rounds are the ones that belong to powerful actors with the best ability to actualize their goals. And these actors are overwhelmingly profit-driven because, one, Capitalism self-selects for greed. That is, the people who want to profit the most are the ones who often do profit the most and rise up the ranks of corporations, etc., which means that they're the ones who are making decisions. The DPM argument, only response to this, by the way, is that you wouldn't do stuff that's bad for animals because you're already profit maximizing, so you don't use the AI to profit maximize more. Hate to break it to you, but things could get a whole lot worse. The issue here is twofold. First, if you ask an AI how to profit maximize, it doesn't tell you to switch your whole fucking supply chain from real meat to the tastiest fake meat. It tells you how to make your pre-existing supply chain more efficient. And the reason for this, by the way, is that shareholders are not we're already profit maximizing. I guess we shouldn't profit maximize anymore. No thanks, Dennis. Rather, shareholders say, oh, you have this great new tool that can generate me a 50% larger bonus. You go for it. Second, we're just winning prior reasons that AI makes Purdue Pharma exponentially better at stuff like lobbying. So in their world, there's literally never the option of meat substitutes because you ban them, like the shit the butter people did to fucking margarine. We just have this very liberal presumption that the entire United States is suddenly going to be comfortable with eating fake meat. But all of a sudden, when you have all these AI models spreading narratives like you need the protein from meat or fake meat gives you cancer, which or things you can extrapolate from data, because if you torture data enough, it will literally tell you anything. Then you have a large mass of individuals who are just buying writ large into these narratives because they perceive the AI to be fundamentally objective. I'll take closing.
In a world where lab-grown meat is viable, those firms and their investors are also throwing capital to propaganda war. There's no reason
of issues here.
Viable
First,
to assume again.
Even if lab-grown meat does become viable, the time frame in which it becomes viable allows these AIs to just basically solve the game, figure out exactly what marketing strategy is best to turn people massively against Beyond Meat. Recognize that these corporations need to develop capital to begin with. The issue, though, is that AI models are coming now, which means that these corporations that lack capital already have a massive comparative disadvantage. And 5 or 10 years down the line, they're actually just screwed. Finally, the existence of AI won't make us more empathetic. Ryan's other narrative, ironically, doesn't actually make sense to me, even from a philosophical context, because he's literally talking about theories of embodied existence, like Levinas or Buber, who talked about the other. These are about the carnal, ethical experience of the other that shatters our phenomenological paradigm of human intelligence. But AI is not like that. It exists within our paradigm of human intelligence. It is not an other in the true sense of a word, which is why toddlers don't get empathy from talking to the Snapchat AI. They internalize the idea that they're the center of their own world and that other intelligences merely exist as mimicries of the human experience, as satellites to human pleasure. But B, this just does the reverse. This looks like horrible people abusing their AI girlfriends in these online echo chambers. They can do so because there's a lack of the carnal feel of the other human being, because you view animals, you don't empathize with animals because you conceptualize them as intelligent. You empathize with animals because you see a dog and you feel some emotion that you ought not harm that individual. This is a fundamentally different type of ethical relationship. Here's how the round breaks down. You give bad people very powerful tools. Even if you give the good guy a gun too, it doesn't matter. He's going to draw it too late and his gun's not going to be big enough. For these reasons, we're proud to oppose.
Oh, I'm in the picture.
Oh, okay. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah, you're audible.
Cool. Please put POIs in the chat. I will take opening, probably around 5. Is anybody not ready? Cool. The reason we care about AI is not because it can talk to us, which is the only use case seriously discussed by either opening team. I'm sure this is something about OG's case. Admittedly, I'm not sure what. But the reason we actually care about AI is because the models that make large language models work are intrinsically useful for lots of other things. Our argument on CG is that AI enables research, which makes meat alternatives more viable and counterintuitively makes factory farming less unethical. As a consequence, we think this is important because AI creates a world where green meat firms have the same, if not more, economic power than factory farms, which means to the extent you buy OO, that it's bad to give economic power to factory farms. We solve this because they're not just fighting activists, but they're fighting other firms that also have investors throwing money at them. Look, AI is not just large language models like ChatGPT. These are a special use case of statistical machine learning techniques like neural networks. This means, one, this motion obviously includes all of those, but even if you're skeptical about this for some reason, they obviously intrinsically are tied to the development of AI, because when these techniques get better is precisely when AI gets better. These are useful for lots of things. One of the best use cases is they're essential for protein folding. This means you can, for example, make enzymes that make you grow the meat. This is better than the mechanism that OG gives you, which is that AI tells you what tastes better or something. Now, why are AIs really good for this and why can't you use other stuff? Well, the alternative is physics-based simulations that, one, are way too computationally expensive, and two, are bottlenecked by fluid dynamics. By contrast, statistical machine learning can extrapolate current data to skip over all that bullshit and just figure out what protein folds right. I'm sure there's many other use cases, but there's just one really good use case. And empirics show this. The recent development of statistical machine learning has given us protein folding breakthroughs, which has given us the first examples of lab-grown meat. And this is great, not because we get lab-grown meat, but also maybe get better GMOs that are more environmentally friendly. Maybe we can get pesticides that don't fucking destroy the environment, because counterintuitively, often the things that are bad for animals are bad for animals because they do bad things which harm efficiency. So the burden for opposition is not just to prove that more efficiency is bad, but to prove the way the efficiency gained is when we are torturing chickens more, as opposed to making them not get sick, which probably makes them suffer less on net, because at least they don't have chicken pneumonia while they're stuck in the cage. But look, this is really good for a couple of reasons. One, you're often going to get cost-efficient scaling of technologies like lab-grown meat. And you're often able to develop more varieties, things that taste different ways, things that look different ways, things that seem more appealing. And, empirically, we know this because after we got protein folding, we got lab-grown meat. So in a world where we have better statistical machine learning, we are going to relatively quickly get a number of breakthroughs on more ethical ways to consume meat. I think the green meat alternatives probably are the best way to solve factory farming. First, I think people will adopt lab-grown meat rather than slaughter meat for reasons. One, it's probably going to be cheaper. There's always logistical bottlenecks to factory farming for obvious reasons. Even if they make it more efficient, you still have to raise the animal and torture it to death. By contrast, it's pretty easy once you know how to grow the cells to just grow. You don't have to put as much food in. It doesn't have to shit out as much. The inputs are lower. It necessarily is way cheaper. Second, it's less gross. People will be forced to confront and feel bad about eating the carcass of a tortured animal when they know there's an alternative in a way they don't have to right now, and they won't want to do it. See, we can engineer it to taste better. And finally, I think norms are going to adapt. Even if they're right, there will be some initial opposition. I think in a generation, most of that opposition will go away, because in general, our norms adapt over time in ways that are responsive to our society. By contrast, I don't think people will ever voluntarily go vegan through any sort of constant shift. And this isn't a propaganda argument. Rather, it's people don't want the personal sacrifice. They think that meat tastes good. Maybe they're from a developing country like China, eating pork and pork to your culture, and you're often relatively poor, so you don't want to buy a more expensive alternative. And there's also a lot of cognitive dissonance. In a world where you only have slaughter meat, if you go vegan, you have to admit you spent your life doing a fucked up thing. But when you have lab-grown meat, you have cover for this and can feel less bad about it and can shift and say, oh, it's because it's cheaper. You don't have to feel as bad about it, because regular people have the ability to shift without fighting their own cognitive dissonance. Third, it creates economic incentives to challenge factory farming. I know that OL postures are really hard saying there's some sort of first mover advantage, but obviously there are trillions of dollars spent on meat. If you could even get 5% of that market share, oh my God, you're so rich. Every investment fund is going to want to throw an ungodly amount of money at this. At the point you think you can somehow buy politicians to ban this, I don't see why it doesn't happen the other way around. Investors are going to throw money at all these new firms once we get this technology. Consequently, this solves the fundamental asymmetry which opening half had, which is that only corporations are on the slaughter side, only actors are on the other side. When we move to a world where corporations are on both sides, that is likely to solve the asymmetry. I'll take opening. Closing?
No, we're good.
Okay, no engagement.
Yeah.
Sad.
How do you overcome the traditional tie that people have to eating meat or their aversion to lab-grown meat? It's not the case that they just say what's cheaper. People have their own internal narratives and biases. You've proven to me not at all how you shift these things.
Okay, so two answers. One, I think for most people, they're just going to say, one, what tastes better, two, what is cheaper. I think for most people, especially in developing countries where there's low disposable income, and where most meat consumption happens, by the way, is more proximal than, oh, it feels icky. All food feels icky if you think about it too hard. But also, look, even if some old people have some issues with it, I think that over time, the norms are going to change. Yeah, at first it might be only, oh, the cheap restaurants are serving this. But I went there with my friends and it was fine. Norms tend to develop over time, and usually when we develop cheap food alternatives that taste good, we tend to adapt those. I think the intuition pump that, oh, it's lab grown, no one will accept that, is kind of odd when you consider the alternative is we tortured the animal to death and is eating its carcass. We're socialized to be okay with that, so I think we're probably okay to be socialized with, oh, we grew it instead. Check the intuition pump there. So look, what outweighs? I think we all agree the biggest harm is factory farming. But factory farming is downhill of economic incentives. You're only going to torture the animal to death if you think you can sell its carcass. Less people want to buy its carcass, you torture less animals to death. Maybe with AI, you're able to do it a little bit more cheaper, but less people want to buy it, it doesn't matter. Final note, counterintuitive as it is, most of the ways you get more efficient probably involve torturing the animal less. I.e., you can't physically cram more pigs in the space. The AI won't tell you how to do that. What the AI is going to tell you how to do is how to give the pig a better antibiotic or genetically engineer it so it doesn't get sick. Yeah, this isn't great ethically, but the pig is suffering less, which is probably a net gain. Because, if I'm a pig, I'd rather not have pig pneumonia while I'm being tortured. Hard to propose.
We thank that speaker for their speech and invite the member up.
Okay, POIs in chat, please. In the grand finals of a tournament, opening opposition misses the comparative in this debate, because this becomes a problem when closing government gets and points out that there are other actors in the world that can use AI for good, and they've failed to prove the burden as to why AI, on average, is going to do more harm than good relative to the actors that perhaps have the interest of animals at heart. We're going to do two things in closing opposition. First, we're going to prove a larger harm in terms of scope than opening off in terms of why AI is going to directly do harm. Second, we're going to fill in the missing counterfactual about why good actors are always going to be more ineffective or worse in terms of actually outcompeting the actors that do harm. So first, let's talk about the direct harms that occur from AI. And I think there's two main things I'm going to push here. First, I think this leads to a massive increase in industrialization, which destroys habitats, hurts animals, hurts the ecosystem. And this is because AI can be used to optimize for production and manufacturing. So this applies outside of directly the agricultural sector. It's industrialization and manufacturing as a whole. And this means AI can do things like design more efficient machines, encourage and make production more efficient in this way. And I want to observe how this is a massive tipping point for expansion in industrialization and the manufacturing sector. Where in the context of this debate, this primarily takes place in developed countries where AI development is the most relevant. And this has two key implications. Where one, in many of these developing countries, they've already have a very established manufacturing sector from the past, and there's very finite ways in which you can be more efficient with just land and human capital, because there's always inherent limits to these sorts of things. And this means that AI has the capacity to innovate, for example, new machines or new strategies that can completely revolutionize manufacturing today. But secondly, I'd suggest that rising wages in developed countries has decreased the manufacturing sector and was otherwise likely to continue decreasing it in the future, because as developed countries become richer, labor becomes more expensive and your products from manufacturing and your exports become less competitive. So whereas there otherwise would have been a decline in industrialization, the rise of AI that makes it drastically more efficient, that can reduce the cost of manufactured products, reverses this trend and hurts animals. It means that we have the greater destruction of habitats and deforestation. It means we pollute waterways through increased production, which kills water-based animals, or we destroy food sources when you roll over fields that otherwise would have been used for grazing, or that could have been important for food chains as a whole. This harms animals. But the second direct way we harm animals is the fact that I have the wrong piece of paper. It's the fact that AI in and of itself just takes the amount of land and energy, which is also just not in the interest of animals, because AI needs massive amounts of supercomputers to process massive amounts of data. I'll take a POI at maybe 5-ish. And this is real, and not only that, AI also just takes up large amounts of water as well. We often need to take over entire lakes just have enough water to fuel like AI like supercomputers and to cool them down and make sure they're running properly. And this is also really bad for animals. It again harms water-based animals. It harms like animals that have like their homes destroyed to clear land to build supercomputers. And this is a far larger impact, right? Because this is AI in general, regardless of its purpose. Whether or not it's being used, for example, for the service sector, or like the general tech sector, or for like the agricultural sector, every single instance in which AI is used, even for things like academia, which is CG's case, or like research, all of this still destroys animals because you are still destroying their habitats, you're still destroying their lives. It's not just about AI specifically for agriculture. I want to begin by weighing this against OG. So OG has a very indirect claim about like potentially changing people's minds that like maybe has trickle-down impacts to animals. Like this is just a far more direct way that you destroy animals' lives. But more importantly, let's weigh this against OO. I think when they talk about lobbying, they again have a sort of more uncertain impact. Like, is this the tipping point to actually pass these bad policies? But more importantly, when they talk about factory farming, I think we outweigh them in terms of scope because their impact only applies to specifically agricultural sectors and factory farming. And also just like, I'm not even clear if this makes it worse for animals. Like maybe if you make factory farming more efficient, it's like less torturous, who knows? But I think in terms of both scope and certainty, we destroy far more lives of animals, and it's a more certain impact that if you destroy ecosystems, these are animals that are dead that otherwise would not have had to die. This is incredibly harmful. Second, let's talk a little bit more about the comparative, which is strategically important in this debate because O fails to actually weigh the costs and the benefits of AI. I want to explain why good actors, whether it be animal activist groups and organizations, or for example, like artificial meat companies, as CG talks about, are always going to have a smaller impact relative to those really, really harmful actors. And the first observation I want to make as to why this is the case, well, the main observation is that AI is just really expensive. It requires many experts who demand like very high wages to actually build the AI in the first place. B, you need like very sophisticated tech software. But C, and most importantly, you need massive amounts of infrastructure with you need to buy supercomputers, buy out land, buy out water, which means you need massive amounts of resources to afford AI development in the very first place. And also like D, you probably need to like buy data to train it on. But the crux of this case then, this argument, is that the problem that exists in the status quo is that these groups that have good incentives are often structurally too poor or comparatively more poor than those other actors who are not sufficiently well off to develop AI rapidly or as sophisticatedly to outpace the harms that they are doing. This is because many of these agencies or just organizations are not profitable or not as profitable because they oftentimes don't have profitable business models because they're focused on conservation, which doesn't inherently make you as much money. Oftentimes like these are predominantly NGOs, and even if CG wants to talk about, for example, green meat firms, they're still substantially weaker in terms of finances because they are less profitable because there's less of like their products are still very expensive, they're like speculative, there's a stigma against them, they're just like significantly less strong in terms of finances and therefore have less money overall. This has a couple of key implications, right? A, it means the organization has very few total funds. B, it means they pay low wages, they don't attract the best talents. And C, they don't attract investments either because the AI is not expected to make a return for the people who would be investing. What is the implication of this then? I think the implication of this is that there's firstly a massive opportunity cost of money that could have otherwise been used. So for example, when animal rights organizations are developing AI, this money could have directly been used for conservation efforts or for social advances. But secondly, I'd suggest that the fact that it is too expensive and these groups are not rich enough means they never sufficiently develop sufficiently skilled supercomputers or AI in the first place. Even if they make some progress, they don't meet the sufficient thresholds to develop AI that is sophisticated enough to outpace the horrible things that are happening. But the other harm I want to observe then, that even if they do successfully develop AI, the AI is not going to be very effective. Often it's going to be very faulty or flawed, whether it be research in terms of green meat production, but also research for animal welfare as well. Because animal welfare and many things, so for example, like meat production, is often very circumstantially relevant. So I'm making like an ethology claim here, but there's often complex dynamics between different species in an ecosystem that exists in this very careful balance, right? But AI takes information and generalizes it, which often doesn't work in this context. And this is really crucial because it means that even if the AI system spits out strategies that you want to pursue, it often does more harm than good if you try to apply it because it's not tailored to specific circumstances, but you still pursue these projects anyways because AI has the perception of objectivity. And secondly, it is very hard to hold them accountable because AI operates as a black box. So even in the best case where good actors try to use AI to do good, oftentimes it leads to more harm than good as well. And you might ask the question, if it does more harm than good, like why would these organizations pursue this? I think like it means like so oftentimes there's like EA bros that think AI is the solution and they push the solution onto organizations. But even if these organizations like don't do this and cause harm through pursuing AI, the fact that they are not using AI for good means that on the balance of probabilities, AI will disproportionately fall into the hands of actors that have very flawed interests that destroy the lives of animals. Oppose.
can just pick off their speech, I would like to invite the government whip. Here.
Hi, for POIs, I prefer if you raise either your emoji hand or your like real hand. I don't have the chat up. So what really is AI? It's a highly advanced statistical model, one type of which is large language models like ChatGPT, but you also have other types like those that detect cancer, for example. AI is not good at coming up with original thoughts, but it's really good at testing lots and lots of different combinations and simulations for problems that we already know potentially have an answer, but we simply aren't able to solve on our own. That's why some years ago, lab-grown meat suddenly became like an actual thing, because AI was created and AI was able to solve how to make these things, a task that humans would have alone found near impossible. The creation of lab-grown meat is what will end the tragedy of factory farming once and for all, because it outcompetes factory farming. First, it's cheaper. You don't have to feed lab-grown meat, and you do not have to house it. Factory farming is already operating on relatively low margins because it's so cheap to buy meat in the grocery store. It has to be cheap, otherwise people won't buy it. But at the same time, you have to spend so many resources on raising these animals. This means that lab-grown meat immediately outcompetes because it's just way cheaper to make the same amount of volume of meat. Secondly, it's easier. Your lab-grown meat cannot get bird flu, like what happened recently where like farmers had to cull millions of chickens all at once, which definitely hurt their bottom line. And also, you don't have to abide by the type of welfare regulations that are prevalent in the vast majority of Western nations that we're talking about here. Thirdly, it tastes exactly the same. So there are no issues with people not wanting to switch for taste. Factory farming simply cannot compete. With no factory farming, we prevent millions of animals every single day living lives of absolute suffering. These existences are worse than death. They are confined, unable to move, muscles atrophy due to disease and due to disuse, sitting in their own waste. This is the number one most impactful thing in today's debate, and I would argue that even ending factory farming or ending some amount of factory farming one day earlier is going to outweigh any other impacts that could possibly be given by any other team on any other concept. Let's talk about closing opposition first. On increases industrialization, the first problem is that we want to industrialize anyways. Doing so more efficiently does not mean that we industrialize to a bigger extent. It just means that we probably end up taking up less space because less space is more efficient, which means that we destroy less habitats. But also, manufacturing using things like fossil fuels and plastics is unsustainable and increasingly expensive as time goes on because there's going to be less like fossil fuels in the earth. True efficiency maximizing AI recommendation, like if you're really trying to help yourself make more money, is going to recommend that you use things like renewable resources or find plastic alternatives or use less materials in the things that you're making, which is probably going to be good for the habitats of the animals that aren't directly in the space that the factory is taking up, which there are probably more of. They also go on to say that like AI takes up significant amount of space because of the supercomputers. First of all, that's not true. But also, second of all, computers are just getting smaller every single year, which means that even if it were true, the computers will eventually get very small. But third of all, even if this were true, like how much habitat is it really going to take up? Like maximum, like maybe like 1 mile by 1 mile. I really don't think this is a big impact. Let's give CG their best case though. Like maybe wild animals are being harmed to like a ridiculous degree, but the impacts on limiting factory farming matter significantly more. First, on the sheer number of animals. There are just not that many animals, like meter by meter, out in the wild than there are in factory farming, which quite literally like kill millions of animals every single day. Second is the magnitude of suffering. Losing your habitat is kind of bad, but that happens once and then you die. Factory farming is continuous multi-generational torture for years upon years until you finally get killed and slaughtered and eaten. I think it's going to be significantly more important. On green firms not getting money, this is an assertion and it's just simply false. I explained it already. On cost of conservation, these are different investors. We're not looking at people who care about conservation investing in making lab-grown meat. We're looking at people who care about investing in like agricultural investments, which means you're probably taking money away from the people who are making factory farming anyways. Okay.
Bioengineered meat requires climate-controlled labs and refrigerated supply chains, which is why the cost basis is higher. Why is it that AI will reduce the cost of making lab-grown meat, not just the cost of the R&D to get there?
Okay, so not all types of lab-grown meat necessarily require all the things that you're talking about. That's why we need AI to find different types of ways to make the meat so that it's more efficient, right? That's why the meat that we were making previously was not very, very good. But also, even if this is true, it probably is still more efficient than factory farming. You have to do the weighing there when you consider that you have to raise an entire animal for like 10 years to be able to eat it. It's just probably better to do refrigeration. We can find easier ways to do refrigeration, for example. Okay, opening opposition. They say what matters most is who makes AI. Animal rights activists don't have money to make AI, is what they say. Let's give them their best case. AI is only made by companies who want profit. Opening opposition misses that animal rights and profit are not always in competition. Sometimes they go hand in hand. People fund AI research into things like lab-grown meats, maybe renewable energies, GMOs for better plants so we don't have to use pesticides, because even animal welfare companies understand that their operations are not sustainably profitable. Factory farming, as population grows, takes up too much space, and the use of pesticides destroys water sources and land owned by these companies, so they can't farm in the future. This means that they want to make profit. As the world goes on, they're going to have to move toward things that are better for animals. AI is going to make them be able to do that faster. The bottom line is that renewable, climate-friendly, and most importantly, animal-friendly technologies are always better for profit because it provides a path to long-term profit. In response to the argument that AI somehow like convinces you to hate fake meat so much that you boycott McDonald's, this is extremely unlikely, but also counter-lobbying probably solves. Opening government. Opening government's best argument is that they say AI will make humans empathetic towards different forms of life. This is a good argument, but I think it is deeply unlikely. Because I don't think that people tend to perceive AIs as like animal life, they perceive them as human life, so I'm unclear as to where the link to empathy comes from. But second of all, opening government's choice to focus on the shifting of incentives of consumers is where they probably lose this debate. Consumers' minds are relatively hard to change for all the reasons that have already been said. Best case, it takes them a really long time and minds that are eventually change, but the problem is that factory farming is occurring in the meantime. What we tell you on closing government is that companies do what is most profitable, and they can act relatively quickly because they want the profit for like the next year or whatever. So here's the weighing. One, they can affect even the short term because all they have to do is like make a different factory, close down their factory farming, get new investors, things like that. Maybe it takes a few years, but it's going to be much faster in changing individual consumers' minds. But secondly, it only takes one company because individual companies have a really big impact. If McDonald's, for example, decides to source their meat from like lab-grown meat instead of factory farming, that means that quite literally hundreds of thousands of like cows per day will be saved from death. This is probably a much larger impact and is able to be accessed by any other team. And it also has a lower burden of access because it only requires like one big executive in one company to be changing their minds for it to have a really large impact on the entire industry as a whole. When one shifts, others must compete to have low prices, so the other companies will also shift. This just sidesteps the issue of people receiving like bad influence. It simply does not matter when you are only being given access to things that are probably going to be beneficial for animals when you look on the grocery shelves or when you are driving through McDonald's.
Returning that speaker for their speech, would like to invite the upwhip to end the debate first. Here.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take a POI from OG around like 5. Love you, Dennis. Okay. The problem with Gov's side is they rely on scientific mights and maybes. Maybe you'll get sentient AI. Maybe it'll solve the lab-grown meat problem. We gave you a certain specific harm that was wider in scope in OO and also will engage with the comparative, which OO failed to do. The first extension Liz gave you was on the specific ecological harms the use of AI and AI development can actually cause. 2 ways this happened. The first one was through industrialization, because AI can be used to widen the scope of industrial destruction of land, widen the scope of factors, the kind of resources they acquire. This is because you lower the amount of money needed to do these things. You allow automation. Basically, you push the limits beyond what we are currently limited by in terms of technology and create optimizations that incentivize lawmakers or companies to go further into industrialization. Because at the point at which you make that much more profit and that much more money, you trump any push towards sustainable development, even if that's better in the future. Cross-apply all of the lobbying claims being thrown around and explain why that allows these people to do what they want to do. But the second more important and crucial way is that the use and development of AI itself takes a huge amount of resources. resources. The claim is simple. Training AI takes trillions of computations, GPUs, of which there is actually a shortage because so much training is being done already. So companies are investing in more resource extraction to actually get them. Things like energy costs, alloys, and byproducts. This happens on a scale that far trump any kind of normal use of energy, and this will continue ad infinitum if both gov teams are right and people continually use AI as time goes on. This means that uncertainty, no matter how the incentives play out, which is where the top half loses out in this debate, no matter whether the people in charge want to care about animal welfare or not, the use of AI, the development of AI in and of itself is what's going to cause those ecological harms, is going to cause those problems, as well as on the scale, which magnifies as time moves on. But the second extension interacts with the gov case, which is what OO failed to do. That AI can't actually do as much to the good actors, which I think responds to OG's claim quite well. The general claim they make is that animal rights groups can use AI to either lobby and do good things or otherwise make developments. Tack onto this the CG claim that like AI will get better green tech and fix the industrialization problem. Two reasons this doesn't work. First, on the lobbying idea, great. Opposition movements have AI too and have far more money. So they have better AI models, better abilities to counter against you. I don't think you prove solvency clearly on why you can change people's opinions in this way. That's already been covered. But secondly, on the actual ability to innovate, like do better projects, have better technology, I think Liz already explains why the barrier to expense is too high, but a few additional points of refutation on this assertion. First, that there's not enough access to data in the first place because for AI to make good recommendations or good actions on something like as complex as an environment or an ecosystem, it needs huge amounts of data. But the problem is that the ecosystems that deal with living beings or habitats or things like that are innately complex and really hard to get data or understanding of. To get that data or understanding, you need huge amounts of capital, which they haven't proven you actually have for these kinds of research projects. So any benefit they want to get to conservation movements, any benefit they want to get to, like, I don't know, lab-grown meat movements or things like that, require a huge higher burden of funding and capital, not just for the development of technology, but for the kind of research and understanding needed to push that technology in the first place. But secondly, AI is terrible for innovation in general, which is why green tech companies don't just buy ChatGPT and say, hey, invent a new solar panel for me. What AI and language models are good at is replication and optimization. What they're not good at is developing new, unique forms of solutions, which is why CG's whole vacuous claim on the fact that you're going to get a new technology that's going to solve these problems just probably isn't true. But finally, just pointing out the opportunity cost of using all the huge amounts of money we've proven at least, when you can just put those into other more direct ways to help animals, I'm just not sure the gov case stands in general. Let's weigh against OO really quickly. OO did a great job of running the stock AI does as the rich man wants case, and I'll give them that. And the problem, they don't reckon with the realistic case that animal welfare people use some forms of AI and make some strides in technology, and there isn't some shadow cabal of people who just hate animals and want all animals to die who are opposing every one of their efforts. So Gov, in the OO case, gains some margin of benefit. We've framed that out by explaining to you why that margin of benefit is so small and why in general the use of technology in and of itself is the problem. So we step out of that deadlock in two ways. First, by explaining why the tools are ineffective in the hands of good actors, but more importantly, because of huge ecological damage, no matter what these people do. And that's the important point. No matter how the incentives play out, no matter which lobby ends up on top, the use of AI itself creates ecological harms and damages that are irreparable, and those harms propagate as industries outside of this clash with much more power than either lobby of factory farming or or like ecology, for example, get hands on this technology. I'll take OG.
Companies don't need AI to know deforestation makes them money. We told you that AI is needed for these companies to know what compounds make plant-based meat taste better, or lab-grown meat exists too.
So CG made the better form of this claim, to be honest, but also, like, sure, you don't need to know that deforestation makes better, but you need AI and automation driven by AI to actually fund the like huge amounts of plants you want or get automated like deforesters or things like new kinds of technology in these factories in the first place. AI just is empirically shown to further these things. I think that claim is dead. Great. On CG, sorry, I'm coughing. On CG, real quick, two main pushes. The first one, that AI enables certain types of research, things like protein folding and stuff like that. Sure, that's pretty smart. What's the delta on that? You can get the best lab-grown meat in their best case. I don't think they've actually proven it. I don't think they've proven that people can actually eat it, which was their second claim I'll deal with in a second. CG's extension is somewhat maybes and possiblies, but they don't explain the likelihood of these things actually panning out. But secondly, the development of these models has huge energy and industry ramifications in and of itself. That's a harm that accrues actively. But secondly, on people actually doing lab-grown meat in the first place, the first thing they tell us is it's much cheaper, and that's what people buy in. That's really just an assertion. First, there's a huge upfront cost to developing this technology if you're going to fund huge amounts of AI research, for example, in the first place. But secondly, there's a profit incentive because the very same investors who are funding these lab-grown meat projects in the first place don't want you to cut it dirt cheap because they still want to make a profit somehow. So even if you can make it for really cheap, you can't sell it for really cheap. If you want to retain the investment in the first place, that claim makes no sense. But finally, they say that this is more cheaper because you can optimize in ways factory farms can't. Okay, great. This is just like a back and forth assertion fight. Some sides can optimize, the other side will optimize. Maybe they optimize to nothingness. I'm not sure. On probability, they haven't proven the clear, distinct impact of actually actually getting meat that people would eat. And that's the second problem with their case, because they try to explain to you why people actually adopt that lab-grown meat in the first place. And like the reason they give you is, oh, it's like less gross and people will acclimate to it. I mean, look at all these strict like traditional ties that people have to loving this meat in the first place. Look at the distrust they place on looking at something and saying, oh, it's lab-grown on the bottle. Look at the kinds of lobbying and other forces that can push against this. But the most important thing, why is AI the tipping point to developing this meat exactly? They showed me one way of developing that meat, and they asserted they have a huge amount of capital to do it. Surely they have capital to then just make that meat in other ways or do other things. The problem with CG and the reason they lose this debate is quite simply they don't prove the likelihood of their pie in the sky thing from actually materializing. Finally, on OG, I think like the children thing and like the perspective thing has already been kind of weighed out. It's really just hung on sentience in the first place and proving that this thing actually happens or proving that people actually care about these things. Oh, is quite cleanly dominating that. The second argument is that AI can practically help with animal welfare movements. Weigh the previous contributions we've already given you. First, why these movements specifically don't actually have the capability to effectively use these technologies. It's quite hard for them to do so. But secondly, even if we give them their best case and if we give the God their best world where these people do everything, it's just cleanly dominated by the fact that much more greedy and much more rich people in the manufacturing industry, in the deforestation business, in these other kinds of industries, just use this AI for far worse. And the actual use of AI, no matter who uses it, causes huge ecological damages on its own. So proud to oppose.